You're hired.
Yo, good job.
You are hired.
I can work a mouse.
All right, so for those of you who don't have any clue where we are, we're in Daniel chapter 10.
Oh, I don't feel behind you.
Daniel chapter 10. Yeah, so what is good is that the 3 weeks ago, when I taught the lesson the first time, we did it only by audio, and so there was no recording. So last week when I did it again, we did record it, and so we do now have a permanent record of that lesson. If you want to go back and take a look at the end of chapter 9. And it is a good one. It is where we talk about the 70 years and what that's all about. It's a pretty important one when we get back into Revelations and all. So you may want to take a look. All right, Daniel chapter 10. Daniel chapter 10. So Daniel chapter 10 begins the last section here in Daniel, which is 10, 11, and 12. 11, 12 is essentially one vision that Daniel receives. And so Daniel chapter 10 is kind of an introduction to the vision. Chapter 11 really is the details of the vision. And then chapter 12 is kind of an epilogue on the vision and frankly on all of Daniel's work. So we'll see it all kind of brought together. Again, this vision is a vision about the future. It's from Daniel's day until the return of Christ. We've seen this kind of vision several times now in Daniel. Each time that we see it, we get greater detail. We get more information. We get a little bit more clarity into what the future is, and we'll see that as we get into this time again. Specifically, there's a lot more information here about the tribulation, and so that'll be fun for us to see. Here in chapter 10, particularly in chapter 10, we see kind of the not only the unfolding of the historical world, but the kind of behind the curtain look at the spiritual world and what's going on spiritually. I just want you to turn for a minute to Ephesians chapter 6. Prominent in what we talk about today. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. We're talking here about the whole armor of God, but in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, it says, "We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places." So we have the kind of statement in Ephesians. Here back in Daniel, we kind of, again, get a glimpse behind the curtain as to what is really going on in the spiritual world. And so we'll see that as we unfold chapter 10 here. All right, so let's begin reading. Verse 10, it says, verse 1, excuse me. "In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a message was revealed to Daniel, whose name was called Belshazzar. The message was true, but the appointed time was long, and he understood the message and had understanding of the vision." So first of all, the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Right, so if you go back to chapter 9, verse 1, you'll see that this occurred during the 1st year of Cyrus. So now we're talking about 2 years later, we have this separate vision. The other thing I just want to remind you is we'll just turn back to Daniel chapter 1, verse 21. Daniel 1:21. The last verse in chapter 1, it says, "And thus Daniel continued until the 1st year of King Cyrus." So Daniel's work in Babylon, as we said, was around 70 years, and he continued until the 1st year of King Cyrus. We're now in the 3rd year of King Cyrus, so this is 2 years later. So this is not, that doesn't mean that this is after Daniel has died. It's simply Daniel is no longer in office. He no longer has the position that he had before. So he's kind of retired now. He's probably 85 to 90 years old at this point in time when he receives this message. And mine does say in the 3rd year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, a message was received. It could be a word was received, a revelation was received, depending on your translation. Notice that it says who is called Belshazzar. Again, this just to remind you, this is the same Daniel, the Daniel that they've talked about before, the Daniel that was given the name Belshazzar when he came into Babylon. To make the statement that the message was true, this is a unbelievable message that we're going to see here when we get to chapter 11. And so I think this is a statement up front to say you've got to believe what this is. This is a true statement. This is real. This is not something made up. I think because it is so amazing, I think that the writer wanted to make sure we understand this is really true. The other thing I would say is that it's this message is very clear as opposed to some of the others, which maybe we talked about animals, we talked about statues, et cetera, et cetera. When we get into this message, you'll see there's none of those forms of things. He just gets very clear about what's in the future and what the details are. There's no kind of animals or statues or anything else that we have to explain. So it's a very true, very clear message that he's given. Now the next piece of this verse is controversial. Mine says in this New King James, but the appointed time was long. Does anybody else have anything else there?
And it concerned a great war.
Yeah, concerned a great war. So these are the two different translations. One is that the message is something that is about something that is in a long time coming. It's about an appointed time. But then others talk about it being more about warfare. And frankly, this is just a translation problem that the commentaries have, and they're not sure which is true. Both of them can make sense to a degree. It is certainly a message that's talking about something that happens a long time off. But as you'll see as we go down into verse 10, there is a warfare going on. And so them saying that this is a discussion about a warfare certainly also fits the context. The last thing in there, it says that he had understanding of the vision. If you compare that against what we saw in like chapter 8, when he said, he did not understand the vision at all. This one he does understand. And again, we'll see that as we get the unfolding of it in chapters 11 and 12. But he does understand what this vision is and what it means. All right, now, verse 2. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. So we have to pause just a minute and try to understand why Daniel is mourning. Why is he in mourning? Any thoughts there before we look into it? Why is Daniel in mourning at this point in time? 2 years after he's retired, he's in mourning. Anybody? You're looking at your little notes down the bottom, see if it tells you.
Not that the Greek guy was going around and conquering. It's not that time frame, is it?
There's some of that, but that's not the point here. No.
He's having to go back to work.
All right, go back to Ezra. Yeah, I know you got to find Ezra. Go find Ezra. After Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah in that era. Ezra chapter 1, verse 1. Y'all find it?
Yep.
All right, Ezra 1:1. Let me just read a little bit. It says, now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, so you know the timeline there, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all the kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying, thus says the Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth the Lord of heaven has given me, and he has commanded me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who among you is among you of all his people? May his God be with him. Let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is God, which is in Jerusalem, and whoever is left in any place where he dwells, let the men of his place help him, with silver and gold, with goods, livestock, besides the freewill offerings the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. So we talked about this a little bit last week, but here we see Cyrus making a proclamation, telling the Jews they can go back to Jerusalem. They can rebuild the temple. They can leave Babylon. They can go on and reestablish the Israelite nation back in Jerusalem. So now I want you to look over at Ezra chapter 2, verse 40. Well, if you look at Ezra chapter 2, you'll see we there have a listing of all of the captives who go back into the land, right? If you look at verse 3, I know I just changed your verse, but chapter 2, verse 3, the people of Parash, 2,172 of them. The people of Sheptai, 372 of them. I mean, they have a listing of all the different people. I do want you to notice verse 40. It says, the Levites, the son of Jeshua, the Kadmiel of the sons of Hodaviah, 74. Okay, so of the Levites, these are the priests, only 74 go back, right? And there were probably thousands in that family, and only 74 of them go back. Now look at verse 64, which is the end here. And Ezra chapter 2 says, the whole assembly together, 42,360 people is the number of Israelites who went back to Jerusalem after Cyrus said, you can all go back. Now that sounds like a really big number, but do you know how many Israelites were in Babylon at that time? I didn't know either. It's probably 1 million. Guess that? I didn't get it.
I said the census says we cannot ask.
They just can't ask what their citizenship is. Anyway, yeah, so there's probably 1 million of them there. Of the million, only 42,000 go back. So this is kind of a slap in the face to God, right? He gives them permission to go back to rebuild the temple, to reestablish the Israelite nation, and they go, you know, we kind of like it here in Babylon. We kind of gotten used to it. Our families have grown up here. We've kind of gotten used to the gods that are here. Not sure we want to go back and take that trek back there to, that Jerusalem and have to rebuild. We're very comfortable here. We're very prosperous here. We're all integrated into the culture here. It's kind of an amazing statement, right? I mean, it shows you the very small number of people that were actually still true to God, still true to the Jewish faith at this point in time, that only 42,000 of the probably million, and that's probably a small estimate, of the million people that were there that actually returned. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. All right, so the other thing to mention here that, Cyrus gave the command in the first year of his reign. This is now 2 years later in the third year, and still at this point in time, a very small number had gone. So this is the point of Daniel's mourning, right? He is very, very concerned and upset that the Israel nation did not go back. They did not return. So you may ask, well, why is Daniel still here? Why did he not go back? It's interesting, the commentaries kind of split on that. One say, well, he was just too old. He's 90 years old, too old for the trek. Others take a more positive statement that, well, he stayed there in order to encourage the rest of them to go. He felt it was his mission to try to get everybody out of there. It's unclear to us as to why, but he is still there in Babylon when this message comes to him. All right, let's see. There's something else in this verse. Go back to chapter 10. So again, he's in mourning 3 full weeks. We mentioned this last time. These are real weeks, weeks of days, as opposed to weeks of years that we had in chapter 9. That's why the word 3 full weeks is really it says 3 weeks of days. The other thing I just want you to notice is that I've lost my place. Yeah, if you go down to verse 4, just a minute, it says that on the 24th day of the first month, I was by the side of the river. So he gets the answer to his prayer on the 24th day of the first month. He begins his prayer go back to verse 2, he was in mourning 3 full weeks. So 3 weeks before the 24th day, he begins his prayer. So on the first day of the month. So again, this is, as we've said before, the first month of the year is the month of Nisan. He's praying for 21 days. He starts on the 3rd, he finishes on the 24th. This goes right over Nisan 14, which is Passover. So he's fasting. You'll see, right? He's not eating the delicacies, etc. Right through the Passover time for 3 weeks. I just want to mention this guy's 85, 90 years old, and he's fasting for 21 days. This is not a simple task. Any of you who have done any kind of extended fast, a 21-day fast is considerable and will have an impact on you, and certainly would have on Daniel. All right, let's go on to verse 3 and see the details of it. I ate no pleasant food, no meat or wine came into my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all. 3 whole weeks were fulfilled. So again, this is a partial fast, if you will. The pleasant food or the delicacies, he doesn't eat any meat. He doesn't drink any wine during this time while he's in mourning and praying and fasting for his people, because they're not returning. He also does not anoint himself. So in these days there was a fragrant oil that people would use because they didn't bathe regularly as we normally did. So after 3 weeks, Daniel stinketh probably at this point in time, because he's not putting the fragrant oil on and probably not bathing. So again, that was just to show that he's in mourning, right? This was very typical in the Old Testament when people are in mourning, that they would not anoint themselves with the fragrant oil, and so that also doesn't happen here. I will say, we talked a little bit about prayer last time. God responds in verse 4 and following. You'll see here, God responds from heaven. But why does God respond? Does God respond because Daniel fasted? That's a question.
No.
Why do you say no?
God makes his own choices.
Yeah, the fasting shows a heart, right? The fasting shows a relationship. It's not because Daniel fasted that God responded, but God responded because God decided, and because he has a relationship with Daniel. The fasting shows the relationships, shows the depth of the relationship, but it's not a works that then God responds to. So I just don't want to keep that in mind as we see the things that Daniel does. Sometimes it's easy to say, well, if I just fast for 21 days, then God will respond. No, that's not the point. The point is that Daniel fasted for 21 days because he had this relationship with God, and because he was serious about it, and therefore he did this. God responded because he's God, and he decided to respond. Let's not get the two tied in together. All right, verse 24. So that's verse 4 rather. Verse 4, now on the 24th day of the first month, I was by the side of the great river, that is the Tigris. Okay, so he's by the Tigris River. I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose waist was girded with gold of Uphaz. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his feet like burnished bronze in color, and the sound of his words like the voice of a multitude. So Daniel's in prayer. He's by the river. All of a sudden, he lifts up his eyes and he has this vision. He has this vision of a man who has this, who's clothed in linen. His waist is girded in gold, etc., etc. So who is this man?
Is it an angel?
A heavenly being.
It's a heavenly being, good. Probably not somebody from around the corner, right? Okay, he's a heavenly being. The question really that comes in here is this Christ or not, right? I want you to look at Revelations chapter 1, verse 12. In fact, we'll start at verse 11, Revelations 1:11. All right, so mine says, saying, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. What you see, write in a book and send it in the 7 churches, which are in Asia, to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. And then I turned to see the voice that spoke with me, and having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the 7 lampstands, one like the Son of Man, clothed in garment down to his feet, and girded with a chest with a golden band. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow. His eyes were like the flame of fire. His feet were like brass in refined furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. So here what you see a description of Christ right here in Revelations. It's interesting to compare that with the vision that Daniel has back in Daniel chapter 10. What you'll see is it's almost identical. The only difference may be the hair that is described in Revelations, not quite described the same in Daniel, but the appearance is amazingly similar, right? That you see a man in linen, you see him gilded with gold, girded with gold, his body like beryl, face like the appearance of lightning, eyes like torches of fire, arms and feet like burnished bronze, and sounds of his words like the voice of multitudes. So frankly, I believe this is a vision of Christ that Daniel sees here. I don't think there's any reason not to believe that. As you see the same kind of thing we saw in Revelations. You notice also Daniel has seen him before. Do you remember when this was?
No.
When has Daniel seen Christ before? What?
I can't remember if it's a lion's den or not, if it was an angel. Or,
yeah, so in the lion's den, there was a 4th person appeared, right, in the fiery furnace. Actually, not the lion's den, but in the fiery furnace, the 4th person appears. And then we had this question about whether it was Jesus or not, so it could be that he saw him then. The other time was, if you go back to Daniel chapter 7, verse 13. During this vision, 7:13. 7:13, it says, I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him, right? So he had this vision of heaven. He had this vision of Christ actually coming before God. So he has actually seen Jesus, the second of the Trinity. He has seen him in some form, perhaps twice before, and now he's seeing him here, kind of in full glory, here in verses 5 and 6. This is, in the Old Testament, there's a lot of occurrences where it appears that Christ appears beforehand. I mean, it's not like he's not around, right? He's from the beginning. He doesn't come as a baby until the New Testament, but he is around for forever. And so he makes several appearances in the Old Testament, and we see them here in Daniel. This is certainly a vision that Daniel has of the Christ here in verses 5 and 6. There's let me just mention that the commentaries make a big deal of what he's wearing and such. So let me just go through that a minute. He's clothed in linen. The linen is always kind of whenever there's a heavenly visitor, as someone mentioned, they're clothed in linen. It's a symbol of purity. It's a symbol of holiness that he's clothed in linen. He's got this fine gold around his waist. By the way, this mine has girded with the gold of Uphaz. Does anybody know where Uphaz is? If you do, you'd be the only one who does, because no one seems to know where Uphaz is or where it came from. So this is one of those things that's just lost, that they'll find eventually. But anyways, gold from this town of Uphaz. Again, it's to show God's sovereignty, his kingliness, right? That he's wearing gold. His body is like beryl. So beryl is some kind of crystal jewelry, some kind of transparent jewel. Some people have said maybe it's like topaz. It's unclear exactly what it is. It's actually the name there is actually the name of a town where this crystal would come from. But again, that's just to show God's glory, right? That this amazing transparency, this amazing crystal that he's made out of. Then it says that face is like the appearance of lightning. So again, to show power, to show his omnipotence. His eyes like torches of fire. Again, his ability to see all things, omniscience. Right? His feet are like burnished bronze in color. So this is really, you should think of this as very highly polished metal. So again, very highly reflective. Brightness is really what they're trying to get across here. But really the bronze is to show kind of his wrath, his judgment. And then the sound of his words like the voice of multitudes. So again, this is the word of God coming, is kind of overwhelming the word of God. God does all of his creation with his word, and you see that here in the vision of this vision of Christ that he has. All right, then in verse 7, we're not finished with that, but let's go on to verse 7. And it says, "And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great terror fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves." So here Daniel says he's the only one that sees the vision. The men who are with him kind of run and hide. Do you have any other occurrences in your head where only one person sees the vision and the others do not?
Paul, yeah.
Paul, right? Good. Yeah, go to Acts chapter 9. Acts chapter 9, verse 7. So Paul sees the Christ on the road to Damascus, and then in verse 7 it says that the men who journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice but seeing no one. Right. So again, Paul sees it, but they do not. And then the other interesting thing is if you go back to Acts chapter 24, verse 16, you'll remember this occurrence. That is absolutely the wrong verse. Well, I'll just remind you then, because I don't know where it is. It must be, oh, I know what it is. It's in a different book. I just didn't write the book down. Anyway, so this is on the Emmaus Road, if you remember, right? After Christ appeared to the disciples, right? And he spoke to them and he talked to them, and they didn't recognize who he was, right? So I guess the point is here that God can control what we see and can control what we do not see, right? These men who were with Daniel did not see the vision. The men who were with Paul did not see the vision that he had, and the men on the Emmaus Road did not see the Christ, even though he was speaking to them and talking to them. So it's not unusual as we look back in Daniel that he was able to see the vision and these men did not. They were frightened by it. They went into hiding. It is interesting to wonder why did they not see it, right? But in my mind it was only for Daniel to see, right? It was only for him to see. It was a vision that God wanted to give to him. It wasn't a vision that he wanted to give to everyone at this point in time. He hid it from them, but he gave it to Daniel. There's lessons for us in there about the way that God speaks to us, the way God speaks to others. Why didn't God tell me that? Why didn't God show that to me? I think God shows it to whom he wants to show it to because of his purposes, and we can't, to judge God based upon what he has done and what he has not done is not our place. All right, verse 8. Therefore I was left alone when I saw this great vision, and no strength remained in me, for my vigor was turned to frailty in me, and I retained no strength. And then I heard the sound of his words, and while I heard the sound of his words, I was in a deep sleep on my face, with my face to the ground. So this is, we've seen this in Daniel before when he's had these visions. He just gets completely overwhelmed by them. His face is in the ground. He's laying down. He's flat out. He's passed out, right? He's seen this vision, and he's completely overwhelmed by it. The words here is he's in a great terror, a great quaking. He recognizes himself as a sinner, and he falls at the feet of God. He falls at the feet of Christ when he sees who he is. If you don't mind, turn again back to Revelation chapter 1. See the same kind of situation here with John when he is confronted by the Christ. Revelation chapter 1, we were reading in verse 12. If you skip down to verse 17, after he sees him, it says, and when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead, but he laid his right hand on me, saying, do not be afraid, I am the first and the last, right? But his first response is he faints out, right? He falls at his feet as dead. And we see the same thing by Daniel here. When he recognizes whose this is, that this is the Christ, he just falls on his feet as dead. He passes out in front of him. All of his vigor is gone. It's turned to frailty, etc. So before we go on any further in this, into this vision, I just got to pause and say, recognize that this is the first real vision that Daniel has. So he has some words that are spoken to him that we'll see as we get into chapter 11 in particular. But the first vision is that he gets to see the Christ, right? He gets to see him in all his glory and all his splendor. It's an amazing vision that he gets. First of all, is that he gets this vision of Christ himself. So don't just skip over that, right? The first thing is that he got to see Christ. Right, now let's go on to wherever we are. Verse 10. Verse 10 says, and suddenly a hand touched me, which made me tremble on my knees and on the palms of my hand. Now, again, the question here is, whose hand is this? I will say that most of the commentaries agree that this is not the hand of Christ, that now we've transitioned on to the hand of an angel, and you'll see that as we get into the rest of the passage. He sees the vision of the Christ here in verses 5 through 9, but when we get to verse 10, now we're seeing the hand touch him. The hand is probably the hand of an angel that touches him here.
Hey, Rich?
Yeah.
I like, too, in Isaiah, when Isaiah receives his vision in chapter 6, he says, like, I am undone, I am ruined.
Yep.
Kind of,
man of unclean lips, all of that, right?
I say that is pretty, to say I am undone, like he's just torn apart inside to see this. So.
And I've talked about this before, and I don't want to keep beating a dead horse, but we have gotten so used to reading God's word and hearing from him through his word that somehow we're not affected by it. We're not affected by the point that God is speaking to us. God is teaching us. God talks to us in our prayer. God talks to us when we hear the message. God speaks to us, and it doesn't overwhelm us like it did Daniel. And I think that's we've gotten too used to it. We've gotten it doesn't shock us and amaze us, and it should. It should shock us that God speaks to us, that God picks us out of the crowd and talks to us and gives us a word from God. It's mind blowing, and for some reason it's like it's just an everyday occurrence. Somehow we got to get the awe back in our relationship with God, and I think that's part of the message here. So thanks, Hugh, for pointing that out. All right, let's go on to verse 10. So again, this hand touches him, which made me tremble on my knees and on the palms of my hands. So in verse 9, he's laid flat out on his belly. In verse 10, this hand touches him, and he's able now to get up on his hands and knees, right? So he's brought him from his belly up to his hands and knees. So then in verse 11, and he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak to you and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you. While he was speaking this word to me, I stood trembling. So here we see Daniel. In verse 9, he's on his belly. In verse 10, he's on his hands and knees. In verse 11, he's standing upright. We kind of see the growth of Daniel, if you will, as the angel gives him strength, as the angel touches him and then speaks to him and gives him the strength such that he could stand. He didn't stand right away. He had to grow into standing, right? As he learned more, as he grew more, as he was touched more, as he learned more of what the word was, right? He grew into where he could stand. Again, there's a lesson for us in there, right? As we learn and hear and understand more about God, the more we can stand. The more we can stand in his presence, the more we can stand for him in the world. The other thing I just want you to not miss in here is, again, he says to him, O Daniel, man greatly beloved. We talked about this quite a bit last week, but I think the angel has to remind him that he's loved. And again, I think that we tend to forget this. We tend to forget that God loves us. And even Daniel, even in the midst of his prayer, right, he's fallen on his face. He's falling on his face. And the angels remind me, no, you're loved. You are loved. You are loved. You are loved. He's just reminding him over and over that he's loved, and that is why God is sent him to him, and that's why God is going to actually give him this message that he is going to give him. And he also mentions, let's go on to verse 12. Then he said to me, do not fear, Daniel, for from the day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words. So again, listen to this, folks. From the first time that Daniel started this fast and pray, and how long was that?
21 days.
21 days, right? From the first day, he's saying, God heard you. God heard you from the first day. God heard what you were saying. You humbled yourself, and God heard your words, and because of that, I have come to you. God sent me as soon as he heard your words, from the first day that you set your heart to that. Now, the other thing I just want to notice, he's saying, do not fear. So part of the reason there is, this is a terrifying experience for Daniel, right? Not only has he seen the Christ, now he's got an angel coming down and touching him, helping him to stand up. So I think part of the message in fear not is just simply the events that are going on. But I think there's another piece to the fear not. I think there's a fear not, God, Daniel, that I have forgotten you, right? That I have forgotten Israel. Don't be afraid that my hand is off of Israel, because again, what he's worried about, what he's concerned about, is that the Israelites have not gone back to Jerusalem, right? And maybe God has taken his hand off of Jerusalem, taken his hand off of the Jews, and so there's this fear that God is no longer striving with Daniel, and so when he says to him, "Fear not," he says to him, "You're beloved." He's reconfirming, no, God is still here. He's still with you. He's still with the Jews. Fear not. God has listened to you. Now, verse 13 is a critical verse, so let's read that and then take a minute on it. So verse 13, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, and behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left alone there with the kings of Persia. So wait a minute, let's go back to verse 12. Let's read it again. Let's read 12 and 13 again. Then he said to me, do not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand, to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words. So again, from the first day of your fasting, God heard you, and he sent me. And then verse 13, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, and behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left alone there with the kings of Persia. Okay, so what is going on here? Who is the prince of the kingdom of Persia?
It's the Antichrist.
Yeah. A demonic angel of sorts, a demonic type of angel. It's a spiritual warfare going on.
Yeah, this is our peek behind the curtain of spiritual warfare, right? What this is telling us is that the prince of the kingdom of Persia is a demon who is responsible for the kingdom of Persia. It is one of Satan's demons that he has set over the kingdom of Persia in order to defeat, to foil the plans of God, if you will, right? In order to hurt God's actions in Persia, there is a demon that Satan has put there, and that is this prince of the kingdom of Persia. Now, this angel that's coming to Daniel gets sidetracked by this prince of the kingdom of Persia because he is the angel of Persia. He is the angel that God has placed over Persia to help God's will be done within Persia. So he has been the prince of the kingdom of Persia. The demon in Persia does not want him to get to Daniel, does not want him to get to Daniel with this response, does not want Daniel to hear this message. And so there is some kind of battle going on between this demon and this angel, such that he is held up for 21 days. They're in the midst of this battle. And in fact, they actually had, the angel had to get help from Michael to actually come and help him defeat the prince of the kingdom of Persia, the demon of Persia, such that he could go on and deliver his message on to Daniel. So, get all that? So this goes back to, right, we do not wrestle with flesh and blood. There is another whole battle going on. There is a battle between angels and demons going on. And by the way, who's this Michael guy?
The archangel.
He's the archangel. If you go back, we won't turn there, but if you go back to Revelations 12:7, it talks about Michael. He's the archangel, the super angel. He leads the troops, in the last victory. So he's the one that comes in here and defeats works with the angel of Persia to defeat the demon of Persia, such that he can go on to speak with Daniel. So again, don't miss the fact that Satan has demons assigned to nations to get his will done, and God has angels assigned to nations to get his will done, and these battles are going on. Right, so that is just the reality. This is our little peek behind the curtain as to what is going on, and we'll see more about this as we get into the rest of this. We have 2 whole minutes, so let's just keep going. Verse 14. Now I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision refers to many days yet to come. So again, Daniel was hoping for something to happen immediately. The angel is telling him, no, this is something that is going to happen in the future. There is all of this is about the future, and I'm going to give you some insight into the future, but it's not something that's going to happen right now. It's all going on then. Verse 15, then he had spoken such words to me, I turned my face towards the ground and became speechless. So here you have again, Daniel was standing up a few minutes ago. Now again, he's fallen down again. And his face is towards the ground. He becomes speechless. Why is Daniel all of a sudden again fallen to the ground and become speechless? What has he heard that makes him have this response?
God heard him 21 days ago, and all this was going on. Well, he was wondering where God was, maybe.
Right. And so why does he fall speechless now? You're on the right track, Patty.
Well, wasn't it saying because of the vision pertains to the days yet in the future? And was it just all that?
Yeah. So I think he's so again, we've kind of gotten angels and demons, kind of old hat business. We know what we've seen in movies, right? We know all about them. We read Peretti's books. We're very clear. But to Daniel, he's just gotten a window opened into spiritual warfare he's never seen before. He had no idea that there were angels, that there were demons, that there was warfare going on. I think it just blew his mind. And then, as Patty said, I think that he was expecting, listen, I prayed, I expect God to answer. What is the problem here? And all of a sudden he recognizes, Daniel, God has other things going on besides just you, besides just your prayer. And in order to answer your prayer, there are other things that have to happen in order to answer your prayer. In fact, maybe we have to defeat the demon of Persia before he can even get to you to deliver the message. I think he got this awesome picture that he was incredibly small compared to God and compared to what God was doing. I think that the message in here for me is that let me read 16 and 17 because I want to wrap one other thought in here. It says, and suddenly one having the likeness of the sons of men touched my lips, and I opened my mouth and spoke, saying to him who stood before me, my Lord, because of the visions my sorrow have overwhelmed me, and I have retained no strength. For how can this servant of my Lord talk with you, my Lord? For me no strength remains in me now, nor has any breath left in me. Again, he sees this, and his breath is taken away. He is overwhelmed by this idea that God was working on his problem for 3 weeks. It wasn't like God was ignoring him. God was working on his problem for 3 weeks. And in fact, in order to work on his problem, he had to have this whole angelic warfare that was going on just to get his problem answered. I think the thing that just impressed on me here is we pray to God, and it's kind of a yes-no thing for us, right? God, you're going to answer this prayer or you're not going to answer. And for God, there may be a lot going on in order for him to actually answer our prayer. He may have to arrange a lot of other things. He may have to interact with angels and demons and actually to one, give us our answer, but to two, to actually arrange the events such that what he wants to happen happens. So I just think the complexity of God's world and of what God is trying to accomplish, when we think about our simple prayer, there's a big difference between those two things. And I think the insight here for us into who God is and what it takes to actually answer our prayers is something is an aha that we need to have, right? Rather than think, well, God, why have you not answered my prayer? Why have you not said yes or no? And God may very well be working for 3 weeks or 3 years or 3 centuries on our prayer in trying to arrange all the things that he needs to arrange. And I think Daniel got that and all of a sudden said, oh, wow, I realize what a dimwit I am for thinking that God would just answer my simple little problem. He got a glimpse into the larger picture, the bigger picture, which God has to operate in order to actually make things happen. Does that make sense? That's the overwhelming thing that kind of came to me here. All right, we're already over time, and unfortunately we didn't finish. But there's some good stuff to wrap up this at the end, and I don't want to do it too fast. So we'll just pause right here. I think that what's cool about this whole section, again, 10 through 12 is really all one message. So I don't mind stopping here. We can pick up here and dive into a little bit of 11 next week also. But what I like about this whole first chapter 10 is just this little peek behind the curtain. We get a spiritual warfare. We get what's going on in his kingdom. We get some idea of what does it really mean when we pray. We get some insight into who God is. We get some insight into the role of Christ, angels and demons, warfare, intercessory prayer. You also see kind of Daniel's response when conflict comes, right? His response is prayer. His response is 3 weeks of fasting, and we see God's response to that kind of attitude, that kind of relationship. And we see here heaven actually coming down to earth and interacting with Daniel. So it's a powerful chapter in what we've seen already. And as we conclude it, I think you get even more insight into what God is doing here before he actually gives the vision, which is the amazing part of this. in chapter 11. So, all right, with that, I'm just going to pause, and we'll pick it up there next time. Any commentary on this before we go? I know I've unfortunately talked too much and listened too little. Okay, I'll let you go. What?
Tommy, brother,
What about?
prayer Tuesday.
Oh, yeah. So I guess, did I mention my brother Tommy to you guys yet? No. So some of you know who've been around a while. My older brother Tom, I actually led to the Lord 15 years ago, something like that. And so he's gotten serious about his relationship, and that's all good. He has diabetes. He's lost some toes and such to diabetes already. He woke up a couple of weeks ago and could not see. And so he is going in for surgery on Tuesday on one of his eyes to see if they can do something about it. There's some blood pressure to be relieved or added or something I don't quite understand, but he's going in for surgery on Tuesday. He does have a son up there who's going to be helping out, and he's got several folks in the church who will be helping out up there. So I'm not planning on going up at this time, but I may have to go up at some point to kind of see how he's doing. So I'd appreciate you putting him on the prayer list, my brother Tom up in New Jersey.
He lives alone.
He lives by himself, and so it's a struggle when you can't see. So, all right, with that, I'll let you all go. Thank you all. Love you. Good to see you. Have a good week.
Oh, wait a minute.
Say Friday night, 6:15, Mod Pizza. For those who can make it, want to try to make it. Mod Pizza there on Jefferson Avenue.
Okay, we'll have the 3 granddaughters. Is that okay?
If they like pizza.
If they like pizza, it's
That's starting Wednesday. We have them for 10 days. The 3 older granddaughters. So, right.
That's been your first prayer request.
Well done.
And we had the other kid's dog, so it should be a fun time.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Holiday. We'll talk to y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.